In this video, I'm going to cover 2D animation in Blender 2.9. It will show you how to animate a plane flying across the screen, along with how to add text. This is a guide for beginners to Blender, although it may be useful if you're just wanting to find out about this new feature of Blender. Penguin Tutor is mainly a maker channel, so why would I be showing you how to create 2D animations and not 3D models? There are two reasons for this. First is that as a maker it's good to be able to show off your maker projects, and this was created as part of a video showing a smartphone controlled paper airplane. But secondly, this is also a good way to get started with Blender without such a steep learning curve as diving into 3D modelling. This will then cover skills which are useful when you do move on to the world of 3D models. If you're interested in 3D modelling in Blender, then I've created some videos on that as well. On with the project. This is running in Blender 2.9. I'm running on Ubuntu, and at the time I made this, the version of Blender available through the official repositories is only 2.8, so I've downloaded the latest version from the Blender website. You can also run this using Blender 2.8, but the 2D animation option is not available in version 2.7 or older, which have a very different interface. If you'd like to follow along, then the links to the files that are used are included in the description. I'm launching Blender from the command line here. You can see the new menu and an option on the menu, new file, 2D animation. So you click on that, it'll put you into a new 2D animation. This is not a different program or anything to the normal 3D Blender, but a different view from the viewport, which makes creating 2D animations easier. If you click on the view menu and the viewport, then you can toggle between the camera view and you toggle back. This is the 2D animation view. If you just use your scroll on your mouse, then you can zoom out. So this will be the area where the animation will happen, and as you can see it defaults to a 16:9, so a normal widescreen ratio. So before we get started, we'll take a quick look around the screen. By default it launches into the grease pencil tool, which is useful if you're an artist looking to draw animations. Personally, I'm not such a good drawer, so I'll be importing images and using the standard text tool instead, so we won't be using the grease pencil. These are the drawing tools that are open. You can change your view from this, more for if you're into 3D designs, but you may want to create a 3D object and then you can change your view while you're looking at it. But for most purposes in here, I'm going to be sticking to the camera view, which is what it's in, what we selected before, and the shortcut for that is the 0 on your keyboard. We've got the collections in here, which will house our different objects as we create them, and you can change a lot of the different properties on the right hand side with there's various different tabs for the things you might want to be changing, such as the material properties to change, say, the colour and texture of an object. And then across the bottom, this is an important feature. This is the timeline, and this is where we'll be creating the animation by creating keyframes to animate the picture that you see on the screen. As I've said, I won't be using the pencil and the draw mode, so I'll instead change that to the object mode. Changes the tools on the left hand side, also changes these menus. Includes this add menu, which allows you to add objects which will appear on the screen. First, I'm going to add a background image. There are options to add a background image through the add button, or you can add one to the camera itself. But in both these cases they would need to be added to the compositing for it to be included in the render, and it's far easier to add these as a regular image. But adding a regular image is not so straightforward in Blender. You normally need to add a plane or another surface and add the image to that. To make it a bit easier, I'm going to enable an add-on which handles this automatically. If you go into the Edits menu and the Preferences and click on Add-ons, just search for the Image add-on and you'll find this one. Import images as planes. If you just tick next to that box, that's it enabled. You can close that window now. Now if you go to Add and click on Image, there's a new entry, Images as Planes. So you can load your image here. I've got a background image, and when you import that, it's imported as a plane. It's quite small here, so click on the scale, and then using the green scale, you can scale that until it fills the screen. Now I'll also add another image, which will be our aeroplane image. This one's a PNG file with a transparent background, as you can see here. You can just check how this will look like by choosing the rendering, and you render image. There we go, so it shows the object on the background. So that's how you can add images into Blender. I'll save the project to this point. This is just saving the Blender file. We'll need to use the render option to create a video later. So the next thing I'd like to add is some text, and this will be the last object that we need to create this particular animation. This is done using the Add Text option. However, you'll see that it appears oriented different. I don't know why Blender doesn't automatically set that to our default orientation, but you can just change that using this little Add Text pop-up on the bottom and change that to View, and it will orient it around the view. However, the origin of that is actually incorrect, so we can just see that by holding down the right button to go back into 3D mode and browse around. And as you can see, that whilst in the 2D mode the whole point is to have this as a single plane where we can animate around, the text for some reason gets put all the way over there. So you can just grab that green arrow and move it back in front so that it appears in front of the animation. And then you just press the 0 key to go back to our previous view. Actually it's up there, so it's we just zoom out, it's over there, so we just bring it in to where we want it, and there we go, so it's now in front. You want to obviously change the text on that, so just change into edit mode, allow you to edit the text, and we're going to call it flight test, and then put it back into object mode, and we can move it to the position we want. And if you want to change any of the parameters of these, then these are done through the right hand side, these options. If you go into the text one, and you can change the text. For instance, if you want to change the font, unlike most applications which will automatically load fonts for you and you'll be able to see them, Blender you have to be very specific and you have to import the specific fonts. So on Linux these are in /usr/share/fonts. On Windows then you'll have to go to your Windows font directory, and I believe they have to be either open type or true type, which quite a lot of the fonts on Linux are true type, and we'll just go for Liberation and just choose Liberation Sans Regular. There we go, so set that particular font on there. Other things you might want to do to the font is just you can scale it again like we did the other objects, or you can go and give it a different colour. So it's handled through the materials properties. So set it up a new material and give it a particular colour. Slightly different colour to the blue because it's tied in, so we can go back and we can edit that. Change the base colour. Perhaps a bright fluorescent green, and you can make any changes you want, and then you can just check that using the render. Now you can use render and render image to view how that will look like when it's rendered. There we go. So that's our initial objects created. They're all static at the moment, but that's our first starting point. So far this is just a static image. So the next thing we need to do is actually animate some of the objects on the image. This all happens down on the timeline, which is shown down here, bottom of the screen. But I'll actually use, that's the dope sheet, and if you drag this window up, this one's the timeline here that we can use, and this includes the recording and the keyframe options, which we'll look at in a minute. First we need to determine the speed of the video. You can get that by looking at the output properties and look at the frame rate. So in this case it's 24 frames per second. So as you can figure from that, it takes 1 second to go through 24 frames. Or another way of looking at it is that each individual frame will be shown for 1/24 of a second. To create animations, then we need to add keyframes. And keyframes are special frames that hold reference points for where the object is or other parameters about the object at that particular time. Blender will then create the tweens, which are the intermediate images between those points. You can create keyframes manually, which is what I normally prefer. But first of all, I'll show you the automatic auto keying option. You turn that on, and we've got frame 1 selected there. You can select the object we want to move, which in this case is the plane, and then move it to our starting position. You will see it's added a yellow point there, which is our first keyframe. We then move to the time that we want it to finish, so 48 was 2 seconds. We drag the image to its new location, or make whatever other changes you want to make, and then it's recorded that motion. I'll just turn the record off now so we don't accidentally change anything. But as you can see, by scrubbing on the timeline, it's automatically created all the images, all the positions across there. You can see that by pressing play, and it'll run the animation. If we look at what it's created these object transformations, and it's created one for each of the X, Y and Z positions and scales. However, if you notice, most of them are coloured orange, and that means they're not actually changing, the values are still the same. If you scrub along, you'll see that the only thing that's really changing is the X location. So as I said before, I normally prefer to do this manually, so I'll show that method as well. You can start by just deleting all these channels, and that's cleared all those keyframes. We'll move that back to number 1 and make sure that the record's off. Move the plane to our starting position, and then if you right click on the object and insert keyframe, and then you just select the parameters that you wanted to change. In this case it's the location. So it's just added X, Y and Z location. We now move to our end destination and time, so say 48, 2 seconds. We move that across And then if you right click, again insert keyframe, location, and it's created that. So this is created exactly the same as we had before. You can see the frames, and again we can press play to watch it now. That's the basics of creating animations. You don't have to just change the size, you can change rotation, you can scale it up, and various other things in there. Let's show another thing as well. So all these tweens are generated automatically for us, and we can use that to our advantage. If I create a keyframe here, now it's not changed anything because this is still the same position, but what we can do now is if we drag these out, I've selected all but the first row of keyframes. I'm going to drag those out a few frames, it doesn't matter really how many. Then do the same at this end, around here. Right, insert keyframe. And then just drag these end ones out. What I've done is created an animation which eases in and eases out. Perhaps not so realistic on a plane, but this was a technique I used on my robot video, where I wanted the video to show the robot accelerating up to speed, running at speed, and then slowing down again. So let's just press play and see what that looks like. See, it starts slowly, quickly, and then slows down towards the end. So the next thing I'll add is to have the text start off as transparent and then come into full colour after about a second. So it's in the state that I want it at the end, so I'll go to that position in the timeline and make sure that's selected, and this can be done through the materials properties. So here's the material, and the first thing we need to do is to make sure that the under settings towards the bottom, the blend mode is set to alpha blend. Then find the alpha value, and if you click on, you can either right click and do insert keyframe, or you can click this little button at the right hand side, which is animate property, and that will create the first one. Then we should go to where we want it to be invisible at the start. You can set that value down to 0, and again tick that. Oh, it seems to have already defaulted because I've got recording on. And if I now click play, you'll see how it goes from being transparent to full colour. So that's how the alpha works. So what I'd like to do now is to have the plane only appear after the text has come fully visible. So let that come fully visible first, and then let the plane fly across. However, both of them currently start on frame 1, so what I need to do is to move the frames for the plane. You can select multiple objects, which if I drag across those, then all of these appear on this timeline. So I'm just going to bring this up a little. We'll ignore the dope sheet, we'll just look at the timeline. And as you can see, we've got the text, which the transition from transparent to fully opaque is done by 24 frames, and then the plane is here. What we can do is just get the whole lot and just drag it so that it's after the start. We could either have it there so it appears or starts to fly as soon as that's done, or we could just add it a little bit longer. So I'll just Put it about there, and then if you click play, see, and there we go. As you can see, the last frame that there's any animation is frame 124. Share across all of them. Yeah. So we probably want to show a little bit of static image at the end, but probably don't want to go as far as 250. So if we say wanted to stop at 170 frames, we can just delete that and then change that to 170. So now our animation starts at 0, goes up to 170, and goes up one step at a time. Before we start rendering this image and creating our final animation, just like to point out a little gotcha that I found, is that whilst with the text we can change the alpha of the material and make it turn invisible, unfortunately it's not possible to do that with a image like we've got here with the plane. As you can see, the alpha is set to the plane image because that's how it determines the transparency areas of the image. So what I'd like to do is, if you imagine that this plane would go behind this bush here and it would go invisible. Now it's not going to be a great transition here how I'm going to demonstrate it. Instead you'd have to use layers and have this bush showing in front of it and things like that. But we won't go into that details. I just at this stage just want to make the plane invisible at this point. And to do that we need to use a feature that's actually just hidden at the moment. Under the collection you can turn on this one that looks like a camera, which is disabling renders. You click that and you see it's added a camera against all the objects. And what this allows you to do is to be able to turn an individual object on or off. What I'm going to do is go to the first image, the first frame, and the plane selected. I'm just going to insert a keyframe there, and then insert a keyframe where I want it to disappear. Be around there. So on this last one, click it so that it goes to this pale colour, and that means that it's disabled. Now, one of the unfortunate things about this is it doesn't make it hidden from the actual screen. You can still see it while you're editing it. So it might be that it's a bit in the way, but we just sort of have to live with that. However, what we can see is that if we go to the frame before and render that image, then the plane is showing. And now if we go to after that and render the image, the plane's disappeared. So whilst it's not showing, whilst it still showed on there, it has actually disappeared when we reach the point where we're going to render it. So now we've finished our animation, it's time to render it, which will actually create the video file that we want. First, we need to go into the output options and we can have a look at the different options in here. By default, it goes into the temp directory, so I'll just change that to the directory that we have got our files in that I want to save it to. You also see that it defaults to PNG. Now what it will do is it will create each frame as an individual PNG file, so you'll have a big list of different PNG files. You can then import those into your video tools or whatever you want. But in my case, I'm wanting to put it straight into a video rather than individual files, so we'll go for FFmpeg video. We can choose the encoding and the container that it's going to be put into. So we could have Matroska, but I'm going to go for MP4. So MPEG 4, H.264, and you can change your quality and things like that. If you increase the quality, then it is going to take longer to render. If you're used to most applications these days, you wouldn't think that would take very long. However, in Blender it does take a long time to render, so even though we've only got a 2D image, it's still going to treat this as though it's a 3D environment, and it was going to take a long time to render these. So this one's 170 frames. It's going to take at least a few minutes to render even on this, which is a relatively powerful i7 PC that I'm running this on. If you've got a much bigger animation, then it's going to take quite a long time. You could just leave it running, but for somebody, if you're used to most applications these days which give you an instant result, this is going to seem to drag out a bit. So we go to render animation, and it's going to show you as it renders, and it's going to show you each frame at a time. As you can see up here, there's the frame counter. So we're on to frame 8 now, and it's taking a little less than a second to render each frame. So in our case, probably, like I say, 2 or 3 minutes. So I'll leave that rendering. So as you can see, the render's now complete with frame 170, and it just shows you the last screen. So we can now close that. If we have a look in the folder, we can find the video that's been created. Its name is basically the frame, start frame to the end frame. So in this case it's from frame 0001 to 0170, and I chose MP4, so it's an MP4, and we can just launch that to view, and there we go. So that's completed, and you can do whatever you want with that animation now. It's a standard MP4 file. So I hope you found that useful. If you found that useful, then please share that and give it the thumbs up. Feel free to leave any comments if you'd like to comment about it, and if you've not already, please subscribe to my channel to find out more about future maker topics. Thanks for watching.